So Rebel Ridge, this is a movie that just recently premiered on Netflix, one of their new originals. It's interesting because Rebel Ridge has been in production for a really, really long time. They've been working on
Mhm.
this movie for about 4 or 5 years. Initially, John Boyega was going to be the star of this film. Jeremy Saulnier was always intended to be the writer and
Mm.
the director, but John Boyega was attached to this movie, and they were about to start filming in spring of 2020. COVID-19 happened, and so they had to shut down the film. They did resume in April of 2021, about a year later. And John Boyega did actually make it to the filming stage, but somewhere along principal photography, he decided to drop out of the film. Initially, it was said that it was some family personal things that were happening, but then later reports said that there were actually some creative differences, and
Mm.
he wasn't really aligned with the project because his needs weren't being met. It's not really known exactly why he left the project. It's still kind of up in the air and hasn't really been talked about or explored in depth. However, Aaron Pierre he joined the cast in October of 2021 and ultimately finished out this film. And now we've gotten this movie on Netflix in the past couple of weeks, and instantly it becomes almost an overnight sensation, an overnight hit. Within the first weekend, I believe about 32 million Netflix accounts watched this movie, so it instantly shot to number
Wow.
one on the top 10. It just recently got dethroned by another movie, I think, in the past day or so. But for about a week there, it was the number one movie on Netflix. And so a lot of people have checked this out. It is already super popular. A lot of people have talked about it. So we wanted to come here and share our thoughts on the film. So with all of that out the way, man, I will pass it to you. What did you think about this film, Rebel Ridge?
This is definitely a movie that I watched off based off of word of mouth. I didn't know anything about it. For me, it popped up out of nowhere. But then I said Jeremy Saulnier. Green Room. I like Green Room a lot. So I was like, oh shoot, he got a new movie out. What's going on? And I had to watch it. Again, I was seeing decent reviews on Letterbox. Somebody texted me like, oh, do you know what this is? I was like, no, I don't even know what this is. So man, got a chance to check it out, and I had a good time. This is about a former military man who he has to confront local law enforcement, and he's trying to help his cousin get out of jail. Pretty much, he just doesn't want him to die. Long story short, there's a threat on his cousin's life. Let's go get him out so he doesn't have to force that threat. And the cops low key rob him, and that's what it's about. The cops rob him. He can't. What is he supposed to do? And so this is. It's such a interesting premise to me, because it's not your regular ordinary, this is a cop movie about race. Of course that's in it. Of course that's part of it. Of course it's in the DNA. But it goes so much deeper than that, and it's about uh really law. Long story short, and how terrible these laws are versus like, oh yeah, cops are racist. That's a thing. We know that's a thing. But how deep does it go? And how much does it affect the super patient Marine who is black, and how does the cops treat even a Marine who they don't know too much about? And man, it was just really fun, man. Aaron Pierre plays again a really patient Marine, and I think to see how much patience that character has in this movie is a lot for me, or does a lot for me, because I think a lot of times I think we have been watching movies where the protagonist has like a certain amount of patience, and people keep testing it, like a John Wick or like a Nobody or like a movies like that, where you're like, all right, where's the line? Where's the tipping scale if you're gonna mess with the wrong dude? And long story short, fuck around and find out. And so this movie fits that. This movie also does kind of fit Jeremy Saulnier's other movie that I was just talking about, Green Room, and in terms of like these people who end up in like this somewhat racist situation. Like, how the hell did we end up in this thing, and how are we going to get out of it? I think maybe he's just really good at telling those stories. But man, it was a good time, man. I think the themes are right. I like the drama. The plot a little bit convoluted, but it works out in the end to me. And I think one of the few drawbacks in this film probably is, I think, one, the runtime. I was like, whoa, it has been a while. Like, there was a point where I was like, oh yeah, we've been doing this for a little bit, but eventually it gets itself together. And it's yeah, and it's just a little bit muddled as well. Like I said, a little bit of convoluted plot. It started to be a lot going on, which is okay, but it got a little confusing. That's exactly why we were here in the first place again when you get down into the nitty gritty details. But overall, man, I love the tone. I love the tension. I love the acting. I think the acting was superb. Also shout out to what's his name? Shout out to dang, the chief, the police chief.
Don
What was his name?
Johnson.
Don Johnson. Oh my God, who was just so good at playing that role. He's a beast. And so yeah, man, I thoroughly enjoyed the watch of Rebel Ridge. It was a surprise for me. Again, I had never heard about it, but very glad I got to check it out, man.
Rebel Ridge, I think that this is a pretty incredible piece of filmmaking from a master director, somebody who's clearly capable and clearly has researched this particular topic and this particular subject matter to an absolute T. I had so much fun with this movie because of all the different levels that it decides to examine and explore. Because Rebel Ridge is a film that's exploring civil asset forfeiture, which I don't know if a lot of people really know about that, but it is the practice of cops being able to essentially seize assets from you with the theory and the idea that you might be up to something illegal. And that happens within the first 5 minutes of this movie. And as a viewer, some people might look at that and say, like, there's no way that this could happen. But look it up. Civil asset forfeiture is a real thing. This really goes down. And a lot
Mm-hmm.
of law enforcement actually are able to practice this and utilize this to their benefit. And then from there, after you see the initial premise and you see what's happening here, what this film does and what Jeremy Saulnier is able to do and what the characters are able to do is to create such a sense of infuriating enragement all throughout the runtime where you are just angry and upset and pissed off at what's happening here to this guy. It's like there's no way that everything is working against him, but you're seeing this tyranny of these small cops in this small town basically take over this guy's life and completely just ruin it in every possible way that they can. And what is so brilliant, I think, about this movie is the way that it sort of pivots your expectations and sort of upends what you might expect out of this movie, because it could easily become what it's influenced by. This could easily become Rambo, or this easily could become
Mm-hmm.
a Western film in which you see somebody come to a small town and basically change up the entire dynamic of what's happening here from a political standpoint, from a societal standpoint, which a lot of that does happen in this movie. But the character that Aaron Pierre is playing here is somebody who is skilled. He is sort of a tactician. He's very skilled with hand-to-hand combat, but he ultimately moves throughout this entire film as a non-lethal John Wick. He's not killing people. That's not what he's here to do. It goes a lot deeper than that, and that's why he becomes the most compelling character in the movie, because you absolutely root from this guy from the very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and then every action he continues to take throughout the entire runtime of the film, you're like, oh my God, that patience that you talked about, it's unbelievable, because I don't think I could have that type of patience. I don't think I can move that way. But he is doing everything to such a T because, one, he knows a lot of the law, so he's able to back up anything that he's intending to do, but he knows how far he can take things, and he knows ultimately when he does have to get really dirty with what's going on here. And stuff does get dirty, stuff does get grimy. There's a lot of action, there's a lot of crazy stuff that happens because he's ultimately unpacking very, very deep layers of corruption that's happening in the small town that these cops have been perpetuating for probably decades and decades for their own ulterior motives. And that's not
Yeah.
that's not a unique story. That's not something new, but taking the civil asset forfeiture piece of it and making that this domino effect that happens all throughout the runtime, it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant, because even by the middle of the film,
Mm-hmm.
the resolution that you think is going to happen doesn't happen. Like, they just go in
Mm-hmm.
another completely different direction and they take it to new places. And you just see again how deep this all goes, this level of corruption within this town goes. And I think probably the best thing about this, because this is political in nature, just the
Yeah.
subject matter, but it's not self-righteous. It's not on a
Mm-hmm.
high horse. It's not preachy. I think the way that they examine this, the way that they unpack this, it's done in a really organic way. Because the guy that we are following, he's doing this for personal motives. He's not doing it to necessarily be this hero, this saving grace of this
Exactly.
town. He's doing it really for personal motives, and then his motivations have to change because the circumstances change and everything around him
Mm-hmm.
starts to change. And so, Aaron Pierre, fantastic in this movie. He's a star in the making. I think that this is
I agree.
clearly a huge star making turn for him. He's done a little bit of work, obviously, up until this point, maybe a few films, but not a ton of stuff. But this is going to be huge for him. He's also going to be voicing Scar in the upcoming Mufasa film, and he's also playing, I believe, Malcolm X in the limited series about Malcolm X and MLK, which is on Hulu.
Mm.
But he's doing some really interesting work. But this one here in particular takes him to another level because he's just doing so much with this character. And I would also echo what you said about Don Johnson. He's incredible, just a legend. I mean, he knocks it out of the park every time you see him. He's playing the somewhat related inverse of what he had to do in Miami Vice, but taking it to a lot more darker places in this particular film. But he's fantastic as well, and really the supporting cast is all, I think, kind of perfectly casted. But Jeremy Saulnier deserves so much credit. He is such an efficient filmmaker. He's so precise with every single thing. I don't think he wastes a moment. The movie does sag a little bit in the middle, but I think for the most part, his efficiency and just his usage of time and how he's able to just get to the action and get to the meat of the story almost instantly within like the first 10 seconds of the movie, and you never allow that tension to lift for the most part. It's just master filmmaking. I think he's incredible. He has obviously a knack for this type of story, for these smaller stories with these personal stakes and these crazy situations. Because you're right, Green Room is a fucking horrific, crazy movie. And so to take this and to put it even in a more relatable situation that anybody could really be a part of, I thought it was incredible. And so I think Rebel Ridge, it's certainly getting the attention it deserves, because this is one of the better Netflix original films that you're going to find for sure. This is one of those dime a dozen situations where every so often they will have a gem within the pack of the things that they put out. So I loved Rebel Ridge. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on this brand new Netflix original film, Rebel Ridge. If you've checked it out, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.